Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I look to get on the wire this week. The first guy, James Washington of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Washington here, he's been on and off this season so far, but now obviously over the last few weeks, Juju Smith-Schuster's been out of the lineup and out for the season here. At Washington, he finally had a breakout game in Week 14 in Minnesota. 4 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown, and even had an argument with Ben Roethlisberger on the sidelines in this one. So right here, Week 15, a great matchup for James Washington and the Steelers team versus the Tennessee Titans that give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. I know the Titans are coming off a great ball game where they shut out the Jacksonville Jaguars, but hey, that's the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they're one of the worst teams, no doubt about it, in the league. So right here, this is going to be a decent ball game. The Steelers still trying to fight for one of those last wild card games. And the Steelers almost had an incredible comeback last week on Thursday Night Football versus the Minnesota Vikings. So right here, I think we're going to see more Washington in the lineup. He's definitely a deep ball threat, and he's definitely a guy that could break out and have a good ball game again versus the Tennessee Titans. So right now, he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues, and I would give him a shot this week. The next guy, Robbie Anderson of the Carolina Panthers. So Anderson's been a big disappointment, no doubt about it, this season here. But it was good to see him have a huge ball game in Week 14 versus the weak Atlanta Falcon defense. 7 catches, 84 yards, and a touchdown, and he had 12 targets. The only thing here with this Carolina Panther team, we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. Cam Newton's been a train wreck for the most part since he returned to Carolina about a month ago. In and out of ball games, benched, then brought him back in, benched again in Week 14. But Anderson's been very inconsistent. I know he's got a very tough matchup at Buffalo in Week 15 that gives up the least amount of fantasy points to receivers. So the last few games here for Anderson, Week 11 versus Washington, 5 catches, 30 yards. Week 12 in Miami, a catch for 15 yards. And then Week 14, finally the breakout game like I mentioned before. So right here, he's available in 5% of fantasy leagues. Here's Anderson. I'm not going to break the bank for him. Use a high waiver or fab money. But if you need a wide receiver for your bench or a possible flex option, if you're that desperate, I would give him an ad. But after highlighting a big game for Anderson, he's a guy I got to pay attention to have on this list, but not necessarily go out there and be a must-add player. The next wide receiver I look to get is Jalen Guyton. Chargers. Jalen Guyton, another week, another big game. I know Keenan Allen was out in this one, but he's always been the deep threat here for this Charger team is Guyton. And in this one versus the Giants, 3 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown. So Herbert likes throwing that deep ball, and Guyton's his main deep threat here. So the last few weeks for Guyton, Week 12 at Denver, 2 catches, 23 yards. Week 13 at Cincinnati, 4 catches, 90 yards, a touchdown. And then versus the Giants in Week 14, like I mentioned, 3 for 87 and a TD. So Week 15, a Thursday night ball game. Keenan Allen most likely is going to play. The early reports are, but we don't know for sure. And even if he does, Jalen Guyton's still going to be part of the game plan, like I mentioned. He's the deep ball threat over there in Los Angeles. And the Chiefs, I know their defense have been great over the last month and a half of the season. But I could see Guyton get behind that secondary in that one and catch a deep ball. So right here, he's definitely a receiver that needs attention right now out there. And he's available in 85% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver I look to get this week's Cam Sims of the Washington football team. So Cam Sims had a great ball game versus the Dallas Cowboys in Week 14. 3 catches, 69 yards, and a touchdown, including an amazing catch in the back of the end zone with Trevion Diggs on him in that one. And we saw Terry McLaurin leave this ball game with a head injury, taking a big hit going up for a 50-50 ball and hitting the back of his head on the turf. So McLaurin easily could miss this ball game, I believe, in Week 15 at Philly. If obviously he has a concussion, so we'll see what happens because he left the game and never returned. So Cam Sims, the last few games for him, Week 11 at Carolina, 2 catches, 19 yards, a touchdown. Week 12 and 13, he didn't get any targets. And then versus Dallas, he had a good game. So obviously if McLaurin's out, he's a big add as Cam Sims because someone's going to have to catch the football over there. I know Humphreys had a decent game, but you just really can't count on Humphreys. So Sims available in 100% of fantasy leagues. And if McLaurin misses time, he's a decent pickup this week. And the fifth and final wide receiver I look to pick up this week is Jakeem Grant Sr. of the Chicago Bears. So this guy's electric. And to be honest, the Miami Dolphins could have used him, but they traded him away early in the season for a late round draft pick in the upcoming draft. So Grant, another big ball game for him in Week 14 at Green Bay. He had 1 carry, 5 yards, and a catch for 46 yards and a touchdown, and also a return touchdown. So this guy's like a Tyreek Hill Jr., in my opinion, with the explosiveness and the big play ability here. He's available in 99% of fantasy leagues, and this Bear team actually put up 30 points in that Week 14 game. I know they lost to Green Bay, but they at least gave them a little bit of a battle in that one. So the last few games here for Grant: Week 12 at Detroit, 2 catches, 25 yards. Week 13 versus Arizona, 5 catches, 62 yards and a touchdown. And Week 14 at Green Bay, like I mentioned, the return touchdown and an end-around receiving touchdown for 46 yards. So right here, Week 15, a great matchup for Grant and the Bears versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So right here, available in 99% of fantasy leagues. Good gadget guy in this offense, and a guy I would give a shot to at least add, not start necessarily for fantasy teams, but definitely add him on the wire. So that's a few wide receivers I look to add here for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.